Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that I bet keeps you up at night, literally.
Mm.
You want to know why men seem to sleep through a baby's cries while waking up to, well, just about anything else. You've sent over some really interesting articles on the science behind how men and women sleep differently, and we're going to unpack it all.
Okay.
We'll explore the evolutionary reasons, the hormonal factors, and even how social conditioning plays a role. But most importantly, we want to see if this knowledge can actually help create a more harmonious and hopefully more well-rested household.
It's a fascinating question, and the research really does get into some surprising differences in how our brains are wired for sleep.
Okay, so one of the articles you sent takes us way back to prehistoric times. Think cavemen, saber-toothed tigers, you get the picture, to explain how this division of labor back then might have shaped our sleep patterns today. What do you make of that?
Well, it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Back then, survival depended on very clear roles. Men were often the hunters and protectors, so their senses had to be highly attuned to any potential threats. Imagine a rustling in the bushes, a twig snapping. Those could signal danger.
So basically, they had to be light sleepers, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice.
Exactly. And research suggests that this sensitivity to low-frequency sounds, which often signal movement or a potential intruder, persists even during sleep.
Oh, wow.
That's why, even today, men might wake up more easily to a door creaking open or the sound of footsteps.
While they're snoring right through a baby's cries, it's almost like their brains are still stuck in that caveman mode, scanning for danger. But the articles also mention a study where women were significantly more likely to wake up to a baby's cries than men were. In fact, that's exactly what sparked this whole deep dive for you.
Yeah, that's right. And that study, published in the journal Sleep in 2012, really highlights how our brains prioritize different sounds during sleep. The researchers used EEG recordings to monitor brain activity and found that women's brains showed a much stronger response to the sound of a baby crying, even during lighter stages of sleep.
Okay, but if it's not all about cavemen, then what's going on in our brains that makes us react so differently to the same sound?
Well, hormones play a huge role.
Yeah.
Specifically, oxytocin, often called the love hormone, is incredibly important for mothers. Levels surge during pregnancy and after childbirth, and it seems to make them super sensitive to their baby's cues, including their cries.
So it's like oxytocin is turning up the volume on those cries, making sure moms don't miss a thing.
That's a great way to put it. And oxytocin also promotes lighter sleep patterns, making mothers more easily roused. Now, on the flip side, we have testosterone, which is more dominant in men. And you guessed it, testosterone promotes deeper, more sound sleep.
So while moms are in this light sleep state, attuned to every little peep, dads are basically in a deep slumber, oblivious to the world.
Not entirely oblivious. Remember, they're still wired to wake up to those potential threats, those low-frequency sounds.
Right.
But when it comes to a baby's cries, testosterone seems to act like a filter, allowing them to stay in that deep, restorative sleep.
That makes sense, but then how do we explain those dads who do wake up to their baby's cries? Are they just anomalies?
Not necessarily. This is where sleep cycles come in. Men tend to spend more time in deep non-REM sleep, which is when the brain is basically offline, tuning out all non-essential noises. This makes it much harder to wake up from. Women, on the other hand, spend more time in lighter stages of sleep, making them more attuned to their surroundings and more easily woken up by changes, including, you guessed it, a baby crying.
So it's not that dads are deliberately ignoring their babies, it's that their brains are literally in a different sleep mode. But one of the articles you sent mentioned a study that used fire alarms and baby cries to test sleep responses. That sounds intense.
Yeah, it was a fascinating study, to say the least. The researchers wanted to see how men and women would react to different types of sounds while they were sleeping, and the results were pretty striking. Men were significantly more likely to wake up to the fire alarm, that loud, urgent sound that signaled a potential threat, whereas women, you guessed it, were more likely to wake up to the sound of a baby crying.
Okay, that just further proves your point. But it also begs the question, are we just hardwired this way, or can dads actually train themselves to become more sensitive to their baby's cries? Is there hope for exhausted moms everywhere?
That's what we'll explore next. We've talked a lot about the biology, but we can't ignore the role of social conditioning and how that might be influencing things as well.
Okay, so let's dive into that. Because if dads can rewire their brains to be more responsive, then maybe those late night arguments about whose turn it is to get up can finally be put to rest.
Perhaps. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's unpack this further. It's fascinating how social expectations can actually impact our biology. One of the articles you sent mentioned a study from UCLA that found fathers who actively participated in nighttime caregiving
Hmm.
actually started showing hormonal changes that mirrored those of mothers. Their testosterone levels decreased slightly while their oxytocin levels increased, leading to heightened sensitivity to their baby's needs.
So those late-night diaper changes and feedings, they're not just about bonding, they're actually changing dads' brains. That's incredible. It makes you wonder if dads can eventually become just as attuned to their baby's cries as moms are, even if they start off with a slight disadvantage, evolutionarily speaking.
It's a compelling question,
Hmm.
and the research seems to suggest it's definitely possible.
Right.
The more dads are involved in hands-on caregiving, the more their brains adapt and rewire themselves to become more sensitive to those subtle cues from their babies.
That's so encouraging. It means that those nighttime parenting struggles don't have to be a constant battle. It's not about blaming biology. It's about recognizing that dads have the capacity to become just as responsive as moms with experience and effort.
Absolutely. And this isn't about saying all dads are the same or generalizing about men's responses.
Hmm.
We all have individual differences in sleep patterns and sensitivities.
Right.
But this research shows that dads aren't simply destined to be heavy sleepers who tune out their baby's cries.
Right. And that's a powerful message for both parents. But I'm curious, you mentioned that fathers' testosterone levels decrease with increased caregiving.
Mhm.
Does that have any other noticeable effects besides making them more sensitive to their babies?
Right. It's still an area of ongoing research, but some studies have linked lower testosterone levels in fathers to increased empathy, patience, and nurturing behaviors.
Mhm.
It seems like the hormonal changes that come with active fatherhood actually prime dads to be more emotionally attuned and responsive caregivers.
So it's like fatherhood itself triggers a biological shift that makes dads better equipped to care for their little ones. It's like nature's way of helping them step into that nurturing role more fully. I love that.
It's a fascinating interplay of nature and nurture, and it highlights the incredible plasticity of the human brain. Our experiences and behaviors can actually reshape our biology, and that's particularly true when it comes to parenting.
Okay, but what about those dads who swear they just don't hear the baby crying at night? Are they really sleeping that soundly, or is there something else going on? Is it possible they're unconsciously choosing to tune it out?
It's definitely possible that in some cases a father might genuinely not hear the baby crying, especially if he's in that deep non-REM sleep stage we talked about earlier. But it's also worth considering that our brains are constantly processing sensory information, even when we're asleep.
So even if a dad isn't consciously aware of the sound, his brain is still registering it on some level.
Exactly. And this is where things get interesting. There might be subconscious factors at play, things like stress levels, sleep deprivation, or even the emotional dynamics within the relationship that influence how a father's brain filters and responds to those nighttime sounds.
So it's not always a simple case of he's just a heavy sleeper. There could be a whole complex interplay of factors influencing his response or lack thereof.
Precisely. And this is why it's so important for couples to have open and honest conversations about their experiences and expectations around nighttime parenting. It's about understanding each other's needs and working together to find solutions that feel fair and sustainable for both partners.
Right. It's about moving beyond blame and frustration and instead approaching those nighttime challenges as a team.
Exactly. And this is where that knowledge about the biological differences between men and women can be so helpful.
Yeah.
It's not about making excuses or reinforcing stereotypes. It's about creating a deeper understanding of why those differences might exist and how they might be playing out in your own relationship.
So instead of getting stuck in that, why can't you just hear the baby argument, couples can start talking about the science behind sleep patterns, hormonal differences, and even the impact of social conditioning. It becomes a more constructive and empathetic conversation.
Precisely. And this knowledge can empower couples to find solutions that work for them. Maybe it means taking turns with nighttime feedings, using earplugs strategically, or simply having more compassion for each other's sleep struggles.
It's about recognizing that parenthood is a partnership, and that includes navigating those sleep-deprived early years together. All this talk about evolving dads and shifting social roles has me wondering, are we seeing similar changes in other areas of male sensitivity? It seems like this is part of a larger conversation about how men are expressing their emotions and connecting with others in the modern world.
You're absolutely right. This is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The changing roles of men in society are impacting everything from how they approach relationships, to how they express their emotions, to how they engage in caregiving, both for children and for aging parents.
So it's not just about dads and babies. It's about a broader shift in how men are experiencing and expressing their emotions in all aspects of their lives.
Exactly. And that's what we'll explore next. Let's dive into how this evolving definition of masculinity is shaping male sensitivity in the modern world.
So we've explored the science behind why men might not always wake up to a baby's cries, but you've also sent in some thought-provoking articles about, a bigger trend, male sensitivity in general. It seems like there's a growing idea that modern men are becoming more in touch with their emotions and more responsive to the needs of others. Is this a real phenomenon or just wishful thinking?
It's definitely a trend researchers are paying close attention to. One of the articles you shared, a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, found that younger generations of men are in fact more likely to express their emotions openly, seek help when they're struggling, and actively engage in caregiving.
That's interesting. So it's not just anecdotal. There's actual data suggesting a shift in how men approach emotions and relationships.
Right. And this shift likely has multiple roots. Socially, we've seen a huge push for gender equality, challenging traditional stereotypes of what it means to be a man. Men are no longer expected to suppress their emotions or conform to rigid ideas of masculinity.
It makes sense that as society evolves, so too would our expectations of gender roles and how men, in particular, navigate the emotional landscape.
Precisely. And it's not just societal pressure. Media also plays a role. Men are seeing other men being vulnerable and open about their feelings online, in movies, even in advertising. It helps to normalize these expressions and chip away at the old stigmas.
So it's a combination of factors, all converging to create a space where men can be more emotionally authentic. But what about the biological side of things? Is there any evidence that men's brains are actually changing in ways that make them more sensitive?
Well, there are some intriguing studies that suggest a biological component to this shift. For instance, one study found that as men become more involved in caregiving, their hormone levels might actually be changing.
Hold on, this sounds familiar. Earlier, we discussed how involved fathers experience a decrease in testosterone and an increase in oxytocin, similar to mothers. Are you saying this same hormonal shift could be happening on a broader scale, not just in the context of fatherhood?
That's what some researchers believe. As men embrace roles and behaviors that were traditionally considered more feminine, such as nurturing and emotional expression, their hormonal profiles may be adjusting accordingly.
Wow, that's fascinating. It suggests that our biology isn't fixed. It's actually influenced by our experiences and the roles we take on. So the more men embrace emotional intelligence and caregiving, the more their brains might adapt to support those behaviors.
It's a compelling idea and one that deserves further research. But regardless of the exact mechanisms, it's clear that something significant is happening in terms of how men are engaging with their emotions and connecting with others.
Okay, but what does this all mean for our listener who initially wanted to know why men seem to sleep through babies' cries? How does this broader conversation about male sensitivity tie back to our initial deep dive?
It provides a richer context for understanding the complexities of the issue. While we explore the evolutionary and hormonal reasons why men might not be as easily roused by a baby's cries, it's essential to recognize that these biological factors don't operate in a vacuum. They're interwoven with social conditioning, individual experiences, and yes, even this evolving notion of male sensitivity.
So it's not just about dads being hardwired to sleep through the night. It's about recognizing that their responsiveness is shaped by a multitude of factors, including their emotional intelligence, their level of engagement in caregiving, and their willingness to challenge traditional notions of masculinity.
Precisely. This understanding can help couples move beyond blame and frustration, and instead foster a more compassionate and collaborative approach to nighttime parenting. It's about recognizing that both partners bring different strengths and sensitivities to the table, and that by working together, they can create a more harmonious and supportive environment for their family.
This has been a truly insightful deep dive. We started with a seemingly simple question about why men sleep through babies crying, but it led us to a much broader exploration of the science of sleep, the evolution of gender roles, and the fascinating interplay of biology and social conditioning. What are your final thoughts for our listener as they continue to navigate this topic in their own lives?
I think the most important takeaway is that when it comes to sleep, parenting, and relationships in general, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. We're all influenced by a complex tapestry of factors, and understanding these complexities is key to building stronger connections and fostering a more empathetic and fulfilling partnership.
Beautifully said. To our listener, keep those conversations going, embrace the nuances of your relationship, and most importantly, keep learning and growing together. And who knows, maybe someday those late-night parenting battles will be a distant memory. Until next time, happy deep diving.